All right, Bengals fans, how are you? It's the Orange and Black Insider brought to you by SB Nation and Cincy Jungle. I am Anthony Cosenza alongside my colleagues Connor Howe and Scott Schulte. Gentlemen, how are we?
Been better.
Yeah, little
Agreed.
bit of a rough start, right? 1 and 2, we kind of figured that the Bengals would have a tough stretch, in these first three games, given that they played two playoff teams from last year, one being a Super Bowl champion, and then the other team was a 10-win team that they beat in the Jets in Week 1. But the Bengals sit at 1-2. There's been better times, obviously, but there's still a lot of football to be played, and they seem to have a pretty winnable game this Thursday night, which we will talk about against the Dolphins. Tonight's going to be a little different, and for those listening to the podcast, what we're going to do is we're going to be fielding some live questions via our YouTube channel and on our Twitter. And if you're not following us on Twitter yet, go to @BengalsOBI if you have a Twitter account and check that out. But what we're going to do is we're going to be answering some questions from fans and listeners live as they come into the show. And you can leave those, as I said, on Twitter or our YouTube channel. I'm going to be sending out that link on Twitter right now, so you can check that out. But at any rate, I'm going to start with you, Scott. First of all, thoughts on the loss this Sunday. It seemed to have been the Bengals got off to a good start, obviously, and Jeremy Hill was running the ball, which you like to see, but they really sputtered down the stretch. A lot of mistakes, and then some ancillary noise in the form of rumors and stuff after the game. So, your overall impressions of the Bengals' loss to the Broncos, and if you were surprised at that outcome?
I'd say I was definitely surprised. I mean, I don't think, well, I assume some people, not many people expected them to get beat and then get beat by as bad as they did, especially at home, since they had, that expectations were high for the Bengals this year. You figure the Broncos are starting well, but, they're replacing the quarterback. It's their first really tough road game. I think a lot of Bengals fans were expecting a little better than we saw. Obviously, the first drive seemed good. We had a touchdown. But there was one thing at the end of the game this kind of reminded me of that I wasn't really thinking about during the game, but for whatever reason, the Bengals have just have a horrible record of going against young, unproven backup quarterbacks who you don't expect much from, who just come out and just seem to dominate them. I mean, this goes all the way back to, I'm thinking like way back in 92 when Brett Favre came in for injured Magic Man for the Packers and had a pair of fourth quarter touchdown passes, and they come back from behind and win. And he throws like 280, 290 yards and 2 touchdowns. And you fast forward, and it just seems like whenever we go up against someone who you kind of think, oh, man, yeah, Trevor Siemian, that's a no-brainer. We're going to – I mean, a few years ago, we played Thaddeus Lewis in the Bills. He was coming in for an injured E.J. Manuel. I think it was his first start that year, and I think his second start in his career. And he led them also to a pair of fourth quarter touchdown passes, and we went to overtime. T.J. Yates in the playoffs, now Trevor Siemian. Basically, any quarterback not named Johnny Manziel, who's young and unproven, just seems to have their way against the Bengals, which just makes – I don't know if the coordinators just aren't planning for it or they just kind of figure – I don't know. It's hard to explain. It's just something kind of crazy. And you look at some of the coverages, too. There's like that the pass to Demaryius Thomas, where on the replay, if you saw, he was kind of covered one-on-one, and there were a couple other guys on his side, and they just kind of seemed to stand there. And I really can't explain some of the things the defense was doing. But, yeah, overall, I mean, the first half looked great, other than some of the questionable penalties, which even at halftime, you're okay, we're down by a couple. But, you take out these stupid penalties that, we're playing the refs and the Broncos. We're kind of in this thing. And then the wheels just kind of fell off. And the one last thing I'll say is they kind of said all off season and kind of said it early in the year, we want to run the ball. We want to run the ball. Jeremy Hill, we're going to run the ball. Well, he ran the ball pretty well, 97 yards and 2 touchdowns. And they only gave him like 15, 16, 17 carries or something. And if you really want to, if you say you really want to do it and it's working, keep doing it.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I do want to talk about the referees briefly again. And again, I don't like to be the guy that blames refereeing for outcomes of games, but that is another. It's for the second week straight. There's been some things that have really come into question on that front. Just a couple things I wanted to respond to what you said there, Scott. Great point about the quarterbacks, the unproven quarterbacks, and they also always seem to be ones that are either very mobile or relatively mobile that they struggle against. And I don't know if it's because they're so trained in their maintaining their gaps and contain, or because the defensive line that the Bengals employ are not so much the speedier guys that can catch up with running quarterbacks, or instead of these bigger guys, but that has definitely been a problem. And on that Demaryius Thomas point you made, that's a very good observation. I actually was at that game in person, and if I remember correctly, it was Chris Lewis-Harris in single coverage against Demaryius Thomas. And nothing against Chris Lewis-Harris. He's been a great guy for the Bengals. He's a special teams guy, but you don't put Chris Lewis-Harris, who is arguably your number 5 or maybe even 6 cornerback on this roster. You don't put him one-on-one on an island with a Pro Bowl wide receiver like Demaryius Thomas. And he had his hand in there on the football, but that's just not a matchup that you want if you're the Bengals. And there's a lot of questionable secondary play, to your point, Scott. Connor, I obviously your observations as well, but are you starting to get a little disappointed and or nervous about this Bengals team, not only because they're 1-2, but because they are a team that still struggles against these elite teams in the NFL. They couldn't beat Pittsburgh in week 2 on their home field. They finally come home after 2 long weeks and have their home opener. And they kind of, like I said, I was there in person. There wasn't a lot of, I didn't see a lot of energy. The energy wasn't palpable amongst the fans. I don't know. Are you a little worried about that aspect?
I mean, it's easy, I think, to get really worried quickly. And I feel like I'm kind of singing the same tune as last week. It's definitely concerning. I mean, you have to beat good teams on your schedule if you want to make the playoffs, and you have to beat good teams to win the Super Bowl, ultimately. Fortunately for the Bengals, they've played 3 10-win teams from last year. They're 1-2. They haven't had Eifert or Perfect. I mean, I don't know. It's definitely frustrating because all 3 of those games were games the Bengals could have won. And in the same sense, they could be 0-3 right now. They got pretty lucky against the Jets. So, I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a mix. It's mixed emotions for me, definitely. And I think one thing, Demaryius Thomas catch against Lewis-Harris, it was just such a strange play call to me. I think it was by far, not that Gunther hasn't done a good job, not that Zampese hasn't done it. They're both getting it. They're both just getting their feet wet, trying to see what works and what doesn't work. And I think one thing on offense that really frustrated me with the Hill, people are saying, a lot of Bengals fans are saying, oh, Hill wasn't good after the 50-yard run or whatever it was. Well, he still had a 50-yard run. So I don't think you should just subtract that. But I think the issue hasn't been Hill. It's a pretty predictable run game. Zampese kind of telegraphs when the Bengals are going to run. He runs on pretty obvious run situations. He doesn't call a lot of play action. He doesn't really mix things up. But anyways, the play call that Gunther called with Lewis-Harris, with Demaryius Thomas, I mean, he called a 0 blitz with Lewis-Harris in coverage from Demaryius Thomas. So he literally had 0 safety help, and no one had safety help on that play at all. And I mean, sure, I guess it's kind of a last-ditch effort. You're trying to stop the Broncos, regain momentum, but that was a very, very high risk for a high. I mean, it could have been a high reward, I guess, but if you go pros and cons, it really doesn't make sense. Maybe it's the fact that they had a banged up defensive back unit and Lewis-Harris came in for either, Pac-Man Jones or Dre Kirkpatrick or whoever else got injured. Seemingly everyone on the team got injured in the secondary. But, I mean, it just didn't make sense. And it's crazy because Demaryius Thomas was getting shut down by Dre Kirkpatrick the entire game. I mean, if you watch the film, I just had a close eye on Kirkpatrick because he's just one of those guys I've been watching. And Simeon didn't even look to his right almost the entire game. He threw towards Dre, I think, 3 times that game. And I think he completed like 3 or so. I think he went 3 for 3 against Dre for probably less than 20 yards. So Dre had another good game. There's definitely bright spots. But, yeah, I mean, regardless of how optimistic you are, and I feel like I'm probably one of the most optimistic Bengals fans that's in existence right now, it has to be frustrating because you're 1-2. I mean, people are saying, oh, the Dallas game is going to be difficult. I don't think Dallas is a good team at all. I don't think a lot of the teams that are left on their schedule. I don't think the NFC East is good. I don't think the AFC East, except for New England, is good. I think there's 3 games on the schedule that I would say the Bengals are facing an uphill battle against, and that's the Patriots game, the Steelers game, and then the Texans game, just because it's the Bengals kryptonite for whatever reason. But aside from those games, every other game the Bengals should be favored in. And I mean, it's definitely frustrating. It's a team that should be winning games, but you also have to step back and say, okay, Eifert's been out, Burfict's been out, new coordinator, new position coaches all across the defense. I mean, I can't say I didn't see this coming, I guess.
Yeah, I hear you. And, to your point, the Bengals very well could be 0-3, like you said, Connor. I mean, they walked the razor's edge in New York, and I think they only led in the last 50 or so seconds in that game anyway. They played from behind the entire game. So, to your point, but also what's frustrating is they could very well be 2-1 or 3-0, and it could be granted, a lot of it is on their shoulders, their own shoulders, and that's what's frustrating. Again, it's being there in person. This last Sunday, Sean Williams, another dropped interception. Vinny Ray, a dropped interception. Now, these are guys. Sean Williams in 3 games has 2 dropped interceptions that hit him right in the hands. Vinny Ray in the last 4 games, if you go back to the Steelers wild card game, he's dropped 2 critical interceptions that hit him right in the hands. So these are plays that have to be made, and I don't know if that's coaching. I don't know if that's talent. I don't know if it's concentration lapses, but those are plays that have to be made, and it's inexcusable that those guys drop those passes and then subsequently allow Trevor Siemian, a guy starting his 3rd game in as a pro, to throw for 4 touchdowns, 300+ yards, and 0 interceptions, and that's the kind of stuff.
It's the same on the D line. It's the same on the D line. I mean, Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap have 2 combined sacks through 3 games. So that's 6 games for them. Will Clark has 2 sacks and leads the team, as many as Atkins and Dunlap combined. I don't care what people think about PFF. I mean, Geno Atkins and Dunlap might force a ton of pressures. They might force throwaways. You need sacks at the end of the game. It's not just because you need the numbers. It's because that changes the momentum of the game. And I mean, you need momentum to win games, and you're not going to get momentum just by forcing throwaways the entire game.
Yep. And the other point that's frustrating, and I want to talk to you guys about this, and not to sound like a broken record, because we talked about this last week, but again, some questionable officiating this week. And Scott, one thing that really popped out to me was a call, I believe it was against Carlos Dansby, who got a personal foul penalty against Trevor Siemian, and it was off of a false start. So that was kind of an odd play. And then on top of that, the Bengals also had, I believe it was 3 critical penalties on 3rd down that ended up extending Denver drives and giving them a lot of points. So, Scott, your thoughts on the refereeing this week, especially coming off the heels of some questionable calls last week?
Yeah, the one you mentioned about the personal foul, I remember that was 3rd down also, and I remember thinking, hey, we stopped them. It was a false. I think it was a false start, so we're pushing them back even further. Kind of a free play, and it wasn't a malicious hit. Like, it wasn't like they heard the whistle and they're like, oh, we're just going to keep chugging. It was just they snap the ball, they instinct, they get to the quarterback, and then they hear the whistle kind of late and kind of hit him. But yeah, and when I saw the flag, next thing I knew, they were said first down. First down. There's no reason. That was just, and I know there's the rules kind of in there. Yeah, if they do something kind of malicious or kind of crazy, but that was kind of ridiculous. And the other one that really you mentioned, kind of the continuing theme of the penalties going against the Bengals. The second straight week we've had a non-fumble that went against us, where the replay clearly showed the guy's knees down, and then we had the what was it, the catch where the tip of the ball hit the ground, and and you go back to the playoff game, and it just seems like, and granted, refs are human, they're going to make mistakes, but when they make mistakes that many times in a row, when you go back to the playoff game, the second game against Pittsburgh, and then this 3rd game against Denver, and you see a trend and obviously, you're going to see the penalties more for your side than the other side. But even when fans on the other side are kind of saying, yeah, it looks even or it looks a little worse for you, then you kind of know it's really worse for you.
Right.
If the other side's kind of admitting that yeah, you look like you might be getting a raw deal, you know you're really getting a raw deal if they're so. And you kind of wonder, well, when you see that many in a row, and everyone says, well, you don't want to raise a. As soon as you say that, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're kind of crazy, but. Sometimes conspiracies are founded on very reasonable, rational things, and sometimes they're proven to be true. And so it kind of leaves that question, is it just really lousy officiating that is constantly going one direction? Or is there something to it where, some people like to insinuate, okay, maybe, the league is, would prefer the teams that have more of a value, like the Cowboys have paid, the ones that draw more money, more revenue, more dollars. Is it in their best interest to have these teams do better and to make sure that they are more profitable and always, getting maybe the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And yeah, it's hard to prove, but it is very interesting when you see all the play calling kind of going one direction, and the teams that it's going for are a team like Pittsburgh, who is a very popular team, or the Broncos, who are also a very popular team because they just won the Super Bowl and had Peyton Manning. And so, yeah, just kind of wonder, is there something more going on? Regardless, it's still very frustrating because you obviously don't want to have the refs kind of take the game away from the players. And it seems like
Peyton Manning is what I'm hearing.
The NFL just doesn't seem to love Cincinnati.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the theme that I want to ask you about, Connor, on this same topic about officiating, refereeing, especially what we've seen. Basically, like Scott mentioned, 3 times out of the last 4 games, a lot of calls going against Cincinnati. This officiating group this week was the one who was the group that officiated the wild card game as well. So, number one, do you think there were some kind of preconceived biases there against the Bengals because of all of the activity they saw in that game? And number two, I know you kind of were a little more, I guess, apathetic about the officiating than maybe Scott and I were. But after 2 weeks of seeing some of these calls and plays that aren't going the Bengals' way that should, are you starting to get a little frustrated?
I mean, I don't know. I don't really think my opinion's changed that much. And like I said last week, I definitely understand the merit of what people are arguing for. The knee was down. That was a dumb call. Man, replays is frustrating. Like I would totally love it if they just eliminated replay from the entire game. We never saw a slow-mo replay again in our lives. I mean, it's seriously the most frustrating thing in all of football. We saw the perfect hit go from a normal play to something where it's, oh, well, if you watch it at like 0.005 frames per second, you can see that he clearly was trying to like send Antonio Brown into orbit or what, like, and then you have the knee being down and stuff. And like, I get it. Like the past 2 games, yes, the knee was down on the Uzomah catch. The knee was down on the Jones fumble. The knee was down on the Boyd fumble. And I totally agree with you guys that Dansby call was so mind-boggling. I was just like, I wasn't frustrated by it at all, which is weird. It was just kind of one of those calls that slipped by me. And then when you guys bring it back and remind me of that, I'm like, yeah, that was like really, really weird that they called like unnecessary. Like that didn't make any sense. Like it just didn't register with me. So, I mean, I get it. I get where people are coming from. It's frustrating. But I think every single week, every single fan base has a gripe about it. And it's just one of those things where, all right, this week we only had 2 bad calls as opposed to, 3 last week. And I mean, it still could use work, but it's no Hail Mary game. It's no like, I mean, the Bengals are still hell. I mean, there's a lot to be frustrated with about the refereeing and the officiating, but ultimately, I think for me personally, it's just the way I see football more than anything else is that not the whole cliche, oh, you need to beat the refs, but more as it's not something I like am looking for as much right now. Like right now, I'm really, really focused on, all right, who's playing well, who's not playing well. Like it's just hard for me to look at 2 things at once. So like I said, that whole Dansby call just flew right over my head. And looking back, I'm like, yeah, that is kind of weird. And I get where people are coming from. It's just not one of those things where I want to say it's rigged. And I mean, who knows? Maybe it is, but I don't know. And maybe it's for my own protection because maybe one day I want to work for the NFL. But I mean, who knows? I think I'll say this. I can't say that it's rigged or against the Bengals or anything like that, but I will say the officiating has been terrible. I think it's been really bad. It needs to improve.
Yeah, and it goes back to the thing of what we were talking about with dropped interceptions and other. I mean, they have to start making these plays, and
you got to catch those.
Yeah, you have to make these plays, and both of those guys who dropped interceptions last week were guys that signed lucrative contracts. Williams with the extension, and Vinny Ray to come back as a free agent. I mean, those are guys the Bengals specifically wanted back, and especially Vinny Ray, who is stepping in for Vontaze Burfict and really has kind of a big role there. Those are just plays that have to be made, and I think maybe the message now is, if there are internal complaints about officiating and things like that, I think the message now is, hey, room for error is minimal, if any, and you have to start making every play possible. You have to hang on to the football, even if even if it may seem like you're down or whatever. Ball security is of utmost importance, and you just can't have any room for error, given not only what they've shown us so far through 3 games, but also what the officiating has shown us this year against the Bengals. So give us your thoughts on the refereeing. It's obviously a touchy subject, and one that fans are thinking about. You can download the podcast on iTunes, the Orange and Black Insider. Go find us there. We're also on SoundCloud and YouTube, so you can find us on there, our YouTube channel and our SoundCloud channel. You can follow us, as I mentioned earlier, at Bengals OBI. And if you are watching this live or kind of tuning into Twitter live, feel free to shoot us some questions either at Bengals OBI or in the chat portion of the YouTube live stream that we have here. And we're going to be answering some fan questions coming up in just a few minutes. We've already received quite a few, so thank you for that. That's awesome. Let's turn the page, as the Bengals have seemed to. Thursday night, they take on the Miami Dolphins, who are also 1-2, and their lone win was an overtime home win against the struggling Cleveland Browns, and I believe they're on their 3rd-string quarterback or something now. I think both Cody Kessler and Terrell Pryor played for them, if I remember correctly, on Sunday. So the Dolphins have had the Bengals number of late. They've beat the Bengals 3 straight times, and in the Marvin Lewis era, Lewis is only 2-3 against that team, even though Miami hasn't been anywhere near the caliber of team that they were with Dan Marino at the helm and of things of that nature. So, Scott, we're gonna preview this game here. I want to ask you. I mean, I kind of asked this question last week with the Broncos game, but now that the Bengals have another loss under their belt, they've got a couple more difficult games coming up. Connor mentioned Dallas, New England's coming up. A surprising Philadelphia Eagles team that's currently a 3-0 is coming up. So, is this one a must-win game, especially given that it's primetime, an AFC conference opponent, and the fact that they have a losing record for the first time going into Week 4 since 2011?
I'm going to say yes. It definitely is a must-win. I think last week I said until you have the playoff spot locked up, it's must-win. And I'm going to say this time it's even more so, because with them having to go to London and losing a home game, kind of get back the whole conspiracy thing of, the fact that they lost a home game and the Redskins didn't. So you're already down to 7 home games in the year. You just lost one of them to Denver. And generally the home games are easier to win. You win about 2/3 on home, 1/3 on the road. So you need to win the home games. You've already lost one. You're losing one that you're not getting because you have to go to London. So it's 2 home games going. You're down to 6. You've got to start winning these home games, because, if you don't win this one,
it's a great point.
You're just you're kind of really setting yourself up, because you just don't have a lot of these home games left, and your playoff spot is really being, you're really expecting to have to do great on the road, which you can do, but it's not an easy thing to do. And I think one thing with the, as you mentioned, how the the Dolphins' lone win was that very close game. They had to come back in overtime, beat a horrible Browns team. And I think a lot of people are saying, well, yeah, the Bengals will obviously rebound. This is an easy out. They're going to get by, the Dolphins, no problem. I think they're like a 7-point favorite or something. But what a lot of people aren't looking at is the Dolphins' first 2 games. They had to go, 2 very difficult places on the road. They went to Seattle and to New England and lost both those games by a combined 9 points. So they're pretty much in.
Yeah, they definitely took Seattle to the wire. Yeah, I was.
No, it's like 9-7 or something. So they've, and then even at New England was only a touchdown, and that's a team they can never beat. So you're looking at, this Dolphins team isn't going to, even though they looked really bad last week, they aren't going to be as easy of an out as I think I think a lot of fans are assuming it's going to be, because they've shown on the road they can hang with good teams, and if we do silly things like have another bad penalty or a phantom fumble or something happen, the Bengals very easily could lose this game.
Connor, I'm going to throw some stats out to you based on both teams' performances throughout 3 games this year. Scott mentioned some great stuff in terms of how close they were in those first 2 games, and then obviously they got the win last week, fighting tooth and nail with the Cleveland Browns. So a lot of people kind of think this Dolphins team is struggling. Well, I do the weekly preview on Cincy Jungle and SB Nation, and I research some stats, and there are things that I find out that I didn't really know about the opponent until I kind of check out. So the Bengals offensive line have given up 12 sacks so far in 3 games. The Dolphins offensive line has given up 6. The Bengals rushing offense is ranked 27th so far in terms of yards per game. And even though Andy Dalton is the 5th leading passer in terms of passing yardage, he still only has 2 touchdowns against 2 interceptions through 3 games. So given some of that stuff that I'm throwing out at you, how do you think the Bengals are going to do against this Miami team who, Ndamukong Suh can ruin a game at any point? And even though they seem to be struggling, they've had the Bengals number of late.
I think you guys are trying to talk me out of this one, AC. You've got your stats going for you. I'll throw out a couple stats of my own. Dolphins head coach Adam Gase is a rookie head coach. Bengals are 61-48 against rookie head coaches and 4-1 in their last 5, courtesy of Josh Kirkendall of Cincy Jungle. You mentioned the Bengals are one of the worst rushing defenses or rushing attacks in the NFL. The Dolphins' leading rusher is Ryan Tannehill. So, I mean, that's worth something. I mean,
hashtag dropping knowledge. Look at you.
I think the biggest concern I have with this Dolphins team, and I think that Jarvis Landry is one of the most overrated players in the entire NFL, but he plays the slot, and the Bengals really haven't established a solid slot corner this year. Drake Kirkpatrick is doubtful for this week, which he's been playing. Like him or not, he's been the Bengals' most consistent and best corner through 3 weeks. I mean, just because of Pac-Man Jones' terrible game last week. So you've got a guy who, as of now, is the hottest cornerback in your position group out, probably, I want to say. Then you've got Adam Jones coming off the worst game he's had in the past 2 seasons easily. You've got who's going to play the slot? I mean, Darqueze Dennard is more suited to play outside. Josh Shaw is good, but where does he fit? So you have Jarvis Landry against either Josh Shaw or Darqueze Dennard, both of whom have, Josh Shaw's looks pretty good, but he's been making most of his plays on the outside. So the biggest concern is where's Leon Hall? Not in Cincinnati. And you have their offense is working through a guy who's going to take advantage of probably the weakest defender on the Bengals starting defensive lineup and whoever plays slot corner. So, and then they obviously have, DeAndre, or what's his name? Devontae Parker. And he's there, but their running back is either an injured Arian Foster or Jay Ajayi or Kenyon Drake, who's a rookie. I'm not afraid of their running attack. I know the Bengals offensive line, when you compare it to the Dolphins, is, oh yeah, it's bad. I mean, the Bengals have given up 12 sacks this year to Andy Dalton. Dalton took 8 sacks last year in 12 games. So yeah, it's been bad. I mean, Cameron Wake, I think, is over the hill. He's 30-something now. Sue, yeah, he can take over a game. Mario Williams is just a name at this point. He's not really a quality player, I don't think. He's probably a Michael Johnson level player at this point in his career. So I don't know. I get why people would want to say this is a must win. And if you think that every week's a must win, then yes, week 4 is a must win game. But I just personally, I could still see. I mean, the Chiefs last year started 1-4, 1-5. They made the playoffs. It's a weak AFC this year, aside from the AFC West, I think. I mean, the AFC South is still terrible. Who's the best team in the AFC South? I mean, J.J. Watt's out for the year, probably, for the Texans. The Colts are terrible, even though Andrew Luck's playing decent. The Jags are bad, and the Titans are bad. The AFC East, you have the Patriots and no one. I mean, the Jets, Fitzpatrick's threw 6 picks. The Bills have 1 win. The Dolphins, I don't think, are good. And as you mentioned, Scott, the Dolphins stuck in with, or one of you guys mentioned, the Dolphins stuck in with Seattle, and they probably would have won if not for a drop pass by Kenny Stills, who's one of my boys. But how good is Seattle this year? I don't think that. I mean, Seattle lost 9-3, I think, against the Rams, and they beat the 49ers, and I think whoever they beat week 1, I don't remember who it was, but I'm just not convinced that this Dolphins team is very good. I think it's a must-win game in the sense that this is a game you cannot lose. If you're the Bengals and you lose this game, it's hard to have any hope moving forward. I mean, you need this win. You need to get momentum back on track. Like you guys mentioned, which is a great point, the home games, you really need this win because it's a home game, one of your remaining 6. So, I mean, I get it. The Dolphins have talent. Rashad Jones is a good safety. But, I mean, if you're counting quality players on their team, I would say they have 2 guys who are potentially top 10, probably 3 or 4 potentially top 15. They have an overrated – I mean, their offensive line isn't that good. And their secondary is very, very suspect. AJ Green should be able to take control of the game early and often. I think that if the Bengals don't win this game, I'm going to be beyond frustrated. That's my take.
I think a lot of people agree with you. I threw out those stats that I think people look at the Bengals and the consensus is they're a more talented player. And I threw out those stats because there seems to be a major disparity in terms of overall roster talent between those 2 teams and the stats that the 2 teams have, provided over the course of the last 3 weeks. Now, you mentioned that, the Dolphins haven't had too much of an easy schedule. Yeah, they had Cleveland last week, but Scott said they had a couple of close games against New England and Seattle. Definitely not easy games, but the Bengals have played 3 tough games of their own. And they've had a bump in the road. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's a must win based on not only a game that they should win, and a game that gets them back to 500 and get them feeling kind of good again, but also because they then travel to Dallas, who's having a surprisingly decent season without Tony Romo. They then go to New England, who, I think they've beat Tom Brady once in all of the matchups that Marvin Lewis has had against Bill Belichick, and most of the losses have been just blowout losses. And then you've got a couple of division games in week 7 and week 12, home for the Browns and at Baltimore. There's the really wacky one in Europe that Scott mentioned in week 8 against the Redskins in London. The Giants, who are improved from last year, but we don't know by how much. So, there's the currently 3-0 Eagles I mentioned earlier. So there's some tough games. There's maybe some easier games coming down the stretch, but getting to 2-2 and riding the ship after 3 weeks of not feeling so great about how things have gone, a lot of unforced errors, some officiating errors as well. I think if you not only if you win the game, but if you win it pretty handily against a team that they should beat based on the roster, I think that'll get them feeling good, get that confidence level back up, and go from there. We're going to jump into fan questions in just a second here. I want quick answers from both of you on this one topic, though. Scott, there was a rumor that the defensive backs of the Bengals are displeased with Kevin Coyle. And this rumor came out, not coincidentally, it came out the week that the Bengals are facing the Dolphins from a Miami beat reporter. But the Bengals, you heard the Bengals defense gush about how much they love Vance Joseph. All of the secondary talked about how great of a coach he was. I believe one of the players, I don't remember exactly who, but said that was the best coach I have ever had at any level that I've played football. Kevin Coyle did some good things with the Bengals in his first stint. There are a lot of errors being made by the secondary now. Do you believe the rumor, and are you worried about it affecting the locker room?
I think somewhat. I mean, it's and who knows how accurate it is, who said it, who didn't say it. It is interesting that it was brought up the week we are going to play the team where Vance Joseph is now the defensive coordinator. So, how much of it is there's probably a little bit of legitimacy to it, but it might also be somewhat, hey, let's stoke the fire, get a story, because we do have their old defensive coordinator. Interestingly, though, with him there, granted it's only 3 games, they really haven't done much. Their defense, I think they're below average. They've given up 270 passing yards a game, like 4 touchdowns, 1 pick. They have the second worst rush defense in the NFL, giving up almost 150 yards a game. So it's not like he's exactly lighting, they're lighting on fire down there. But yeah, it's something I think that they do need to kind of look at if they're, and I think it hurts that, you're getting burned. You give up 9 touchdowns in 3 games. So obviously there's going to be some frustrations. People are going to be frustrated. And I think one thing we can't overlook is that they have lost some of the talent. I mean, we lost Reggie Nelson. That was obviously a big loss in the secondary. They didn't bring Hall back, as Connor alluded to. And then on top of that, you lost your first round pick you were going to count on. And they just seem to not and then Adam Jones is older. So you just don't have the same level of roster you had back there. And so, yeah, I'd say there's a little reason to be a little concerned, especially if you get burned like that by Simeon. But I'd say right now it's probably a little too early to be too worked up. And because I think some of the guys did come out and say, yeah, that was kind of taken out of context, or no, that's not accurate, or yeah, we really like Coyle. So it's really hard to know, I think, being outsiders, to know what's really going on in the locker room. I'm sure there's frustrations, but as they say, winning cures everything. So Let's hope they win and, this issue kind of disappears.
Yep. Connor, your thoughts, and additionally on top of that, the effect of Reggie Nelson now being out of the lineup. And I know he's an aging player, but the guy was a Pro Bowler last year. He's now playing for the Raiders. And you've seen the struggles now with Sean Williams and the burden of him being a full-time starter. I mentioned the 2 dropped interceptions so far this year. Do you believe what's going on with the Coyle situation? And, do you think Reggie Nelson and his playmaking ability that we've seen, or that we saw for 6 years in Cincinnati, really would have negated some of the poor play we've seen out of the secondary sometimes in the first 3 weeks?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because actually today I was thinking about writing something on Reggie Nelson, and I'll get to that in a second. I think the rumor about, Kevin Coyle being frustrated with him, I mean, that's after a game where his secondary plays the worst game of the season that they'll probably play, unless, Dre and Adam Jones both fall off. I mean, Jones had the worst game, like I said, I think, of his past 2 seasons. And Lewis Harris got burned. Darquez Dennard got burned against Pittsburgh. I don't remember how he played last week, but I'm assuming he probably didn't play great. But what we've seen this year, there's been improvement. I mean, it looks great, way better than he did last year. Josh Shaw looks really good. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to everything, but there's development already that we've seen through only 3 games of 2 players who the Bengals are hoping will be able to eventually take over and be the defensive backs of the future. So, I mean, with the negativity that is, we lost to the Broncos, we had a bad game, whatever, but there's been some good. So I think, like you guys both said, I think it's kind of weird that it came out right when the Bengals are about to take on the Dolphins. I'm sure whoever the beat reporter that mentions this was probably called Adam Jones, or someone who just, I don't want to shout out or call out Adam Jones in a negative light. I really don't know, but we're at the right time. And I mean, we've seen how emotional the team can get after a loss. People are going to speak. And I mean, I don't think crazy that someone thinks that a coach would ever be on the hot seat after such a short time. I think that it's more just something they're saying to deflect the attention away from the fact that the Dolphins haven't been playing very well either. I mean, they've been close, but they're 1-2. Their one win came against a team that won 3 or 4 games last year. No matter how you put that, it's not great. At least the Bengals have beat a team that won 10 games last year. The Browns haven't won 10 games in the past 2 seasons, I don't think. So, I mean, I think it's deflecting. And on to Reggie Nelson, I think it's interesting because honestly, I think it was the right move to move on from him. And I would love to see last year's Reggie Nelson patrolling the secondary, making plays from center field, but he's not that player this year. We saw in Oakland, his entire secondary has been getting fried. They were the worst secondary through, I believe, 3 weeks of any secondary since the 50s. And Reggie Nelson, I think, got a pick last week against Tennessee, but I mean, we saw last year he was dropping off. He had a lot of picks. Yeah, he had 8 picks, but he also gave up a lot of big plays. He wasn't a very effective tackler compared to what he used to be. There was a drop-off. And so if you're asking me, would I rather have today's Sean Williams or today's Reggie Nelson, it's hard for me to say Nelson definitively over Williams. If anything, I would say it's a toss-up. But you just signed a younger player to a pretty team-friendly deal long-term. You're going to have growing pains at the very beginning of the season. And before they let go of Nelson, I kind of was expecting that Williams would be that guy to take over. And I was expecting early season struggles, if not for the entire season. It's just what we've seen with the Bengals players. We saw with Drake Kirkpatrick last year. We saw with Ogbuehi this year. We're seeing it with Williams. We're seeing it with pretty much anyone. I mean, any first-year player. I mean, Tyler Boyd, Cody Core hasn't even been suited for a game yet. The Bengals generally don't get a lot of production out of their early rookies. And it's not just because they sit them. It's because those players aren't ready. That's why the Bengals like to sit their guys, is because whether it's just a matter of scheme or the way they're coached or whatever it is, the young players generally don't perform that well in Cincinnati at the beginning of their career, with a rare exception being Jeremy Hill. And maybe you consider Giovanni Bernard's 2012 season as a success, but he still, even in that year, wasn't the bell cow back. So, and I mean, Dalton and Green obviously played well, but they're Dalton and Green. So, I mean, I don't know. I think that you could probably, I mean, it's definitely, I think the biggest issue with the secondary isn't anything aside from the fact that they have Adam Jones, and then the next oldest veterans, I guess, are Drake Kirkpatrick and Iloka. So you don't have a lot of age, you don't have a lot of veteran leadership, I guess, is something you could maybe potentially cite as something that the team is lacking in the secondary. But ultimately, I think it's just a matter of working out the kinks, and they have a new secondary coach. They have a new linebacker coach, I believe. I think they have a new D-line. They have new coaches at almost every single defensive position. So I expected early season struggles, and it's a good thing they got those struggles out of the way against the 3 of the hardest teams they'll face this season. I mean, I would take them getting blown out 100-0 in 3 weeks if it meant them winning the next 13. So, I mean, we've seen the struggles from the team. I don't think it's going to get much worse from here. I think they're going to get smacked in New England. No one ever wins in Foxborough, but I mean, I don't think, like I said, the NFC East has a couple teams that might be looking pretty good. The Cowboys look kind of good. They barely squeaked by a couple of teams that aren't good. The Redskins aren't good, and whoever else they beat, I don't know who, but it wasn't very stiff competition. So I don't know. I think that they still have a winnable schedule, and like I said earlier, I just think this is a game where to me it's not a must win, but it's a game you can't lose. If you lose this game, you're going to lose my interest as a team, honestly.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, a reporter could have asked some players in the secondary about Coyle and or Vance Joseph, and they really praised Joseph and not really said much of anything about Coyle, and that was misinterpreted into the fact of, the Bengals were disrespecting their current defensive backs coach as opposed to, what the praise that they obviously have for Vance Joseph. So who knows? I mean, it's a random thing. Obviously, the play has been subpar compared to last year, but there's a lot of time left, as you mentioned, Connor, on the schedules there. So now we've been touting this both today and tonight, but it's time to get to some fan questions, and we have quite a few, mostly via Twitter. which is fine. It's the first time doing the YouTube thing. We usually take questions via Twitter anyway, so it's fine. But I'm going to start with a couple, and I know Connor, you received one. Scott, we have a gentleman on Twitter at Tiger_hype. I think he's talking about the again, it's that whole 140 characters thing, but I think it's mostly about the 1 and 2 start, some of the struggles we've seen from the Bengals, and he asks, is this about losing Reggie Nelson, Mohamed Sanu, and Marvin Jones, or a change in the coaches? With a reduced air attack, can the run game lift enough? And I believe his name is Colin, so thanks to Colin for that. So kind of a two-pronged question here, and I'll repeat it again. Are the struggles about losing Reggie Nelson, Mohamed Sanu, and Marvin Jones, or a change in the coaches? And then the second part of the question is, with a reduced air attack, can the run game lift the team enough to win?
Well, I guess if we're answering Twitter, I probably need to keep my answer to 140 characters.
Don't do that, man.
Over 140 characters.
Yeah,
so.
right there,
Yeah,
right there. Just explaining your answer you just did, yeah.
So I'm not sure how many bytes or how many characters I'm allowed verbally. I think, and you guys might disagree, I think it's more the coaches, just because success tends to breed a lot of people who want to tap into your success and kind of get a piece of that. And we've seen a lot of coordinators leave. We lost Jay Gruden, we lost Mike Zimmer this past year, we lost Vance Joseph, we lost mine just went blank. Hugh Jackson. We've lost some other guys too over the last couple of years as far as positional coordinators, think defensive line and so forth. And so we keep losing these people, and we've done a really good job of replacing them. I mean, we lose Gruden, and then we bring in Hugh Jackson. We lose Mike Zimmer, and the guy who was linebacker coach just steps right in, and we have a great year last year. So I think we've done a good job. The problem is, I think at some point you just can't keep doing that. You are going to take a little bit of a hit. You just are never going to always replace gold. Kind of like the second, in college football, those great teams just reload, they don't rebuild. And you do see that, but sometimes you just can't, Ohio State's not going to go 12-0 every year. They're going to have a year where they lose a couple games, or, Alabama where, they're going to lose.
Oregon this year.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great example. I mean, they've just constantly reloaded this year. It just hits you. And I think, and granted, it's very early, so I don't want to say, we're going to hell in a handbasket or anything. But if you were going to find one culprit, and I think some of the plays we've seen have been kind of schematic. I think some of the times have been burned on defense. The play calling just seemed kind of strange, and the people were out of formation. And some of the offensive play calling sometimes when they're running versus throwing just seems kind of odd. So I think it's more on the coaches, just because they're constantly having to replenish them, and maybe the guys who they have in right now are just still kind of getting their feet wet. I mean, our offensive coordinator's brand new at it. So I'm going to say it's more the coaches. And then as far as the running and passing, I do think they can. If the passing game is diminished, like Marvin Jones is leading the NFL in receiving, and he's gone. So, and Tyler Eifert's been out all year. So, and I think our second top receiver is Giovanni Bernard, the running back. So if we need to run, I think we can do it. I mean, we saw Hill's definitely off to a great start. He's averaging over 4 yards a carry, 3 touchdowns in 3 games. So I think, if we can't throw, and teams know we can't throw because some of them seem like they're playing the run, we're still, for the most part, doing a decent job of getting the ball on the ground. So I think, I want to cut it 140 minutes, so I'm going to stop right there.
Well, you went like a minute 40, so that's kind of like, you're good. So I agree with you, and I think it's just a perfect storm of a lot of different things. It's personnel changeover on the roster, it's personnel changeover in terms of the coaches, and it's a rough schedule. There's also, and we've talked about Eifert, we've talked about Burfict missing time because of injuries and suspensions, and those are 2 big things. But you also look at depth, and you look at Marcus Hardison on the defensive line not being in there as a rotational guy who can rush the passer and as a big body who can help out against the run. You have Andrew Billings, a guy who was a stud in college that the Bengals undoubtedly wanted on this final roster, and to rotate in and take a lot of snaps potentially from Domata Pico. And so I think it's just a lot of different things that have been affecting this team, and obviously playing 3 difficult games as well is playing into that. But good question there. One quick one that we received in our YouTube channel is from Big Grizz AE. He since retracted it, but that's okay. I meant to get to this anyway. He had previously asked about if Tyler Eifert is going to play on Thursday night. Real quickly, he's currently listed as doubtful for those who do not know, and what that means, we're not completely sure. We're expecting him probably in the next. Some people are saying week 6. I would actually expect him at least week 5. Just because the Bengals have a longer stretch between this game on Thursday night and the next game in Dallas, and that could give Eifert a chance to heal up a little bit more. I don't really know if we'll see him this Thursday. I doubt it, but he is currently listed as doubtful. But he has been working with the team, so thanks to Big Grizz AE in our YouTube chat for asking us that one. Let's see. There's another one. He asked, how many broken bones will Burfict cause tomorrow night? Probably not many, but it's still a good one from Big Grizz AE, and he will probably Burfict will bring a spark for sure. I think he will rein in some of that stuff that we've seen, but he will bring some physicality and some emotion to that defense, and probably I would expect at least one big play from him if he returns tomorrow night. So. Connor, you had sent me one from Paul Tomasulo, and I'm going to let you answer this one. Why aren't the Bengals using Hewitt in the passing game more?
Yeah, I mean, you can interpret that as passing or just running in general. I think we talked about it on one of the first episodes we ever had on this podcast, but when the Bengals signed Ryan Hewitt, I really took that as, oh, well, Jeremy Hill runs better behind a fullback. Hewitt's a underrated pass catcher out of the backfield. He lined up at tight end a lot when Eifert was out, and he made a couple of great plays. I remember, I think, one catch he had against San Francisco, possibly. But it's definitely an interesting thing that to take advantage of that, in that they have a fullback who they believe in, who they just paid money to, who is very versatile, and they're just not using him. So, I mean, I don't know the answer to this question. I mean, and I think it's okay to not know. I would love to see Ken Zampese mix things up and get the fullback more involved, because Jeremy Hill just looks more comfortable with more blockers in front of him. And I think, like I mentioned earlier this season, I don't think that there's any way to stop Hill, even if you know the run's coming, if he's behind a fullback package, whatever it is. He excels out of that package. And if you can line up your best personnel on the field, and in the absence of Eifert, you would think that having a fullback on the field with maybe AJ and LaFell out wide would make a lot of sense. So one receiver with a tight end and an H-back, and then the running back. I mean, I don't know if that's the right number of people or whatever, but you want to get your best guys on the field. You sign Hewitt. It really doesn't make sense. I love the question, because Ryan Hewitt's versatile enough to make plays in the passing or the run game. I really don't know. And all I can say is I really hope they start using him more.
Yeah, and it's an especially good question given the Eifert injury. And, Hewitt's a guy that they want to use as a blocker, but he can catch the football. He's done it a number of times, and especially when they use Jake Fisher as that extra either tackle eligible, and he played H-back late in the season last year when Ryan Hewitt got hurt. There's an ability probably for the Bengals to show some flexibility and creativity there. But with Zampese being kind of a new play caller, I think he's kind of getting his bearings down on a couple of different things. So, Scott, we have a question in the YouTube chat. The Bengals, it's from Dylan Hart. So thanks for the question, Dylan. The timing seems to be completely off at the moment. I'm assuming just in general on both sides of the ball, probably more so on the on the offense. What's causing that, and can it be fixed? How?
I think the calls, kind of what we were talking about earlier, I think is the coaching, just the fact that you have a lot of, especially the skill positions, they've had a lot of turnover with the wide receivers and the tight ends because, we just don't have them. I mean, your top 3 guys not named AJ Green are gone, and you have a new guy calling plays. And like you said, I think that whole combination of, hey, we have some new guys on, new routes. You've brought in Brandon LaFell, who's never caught from Dalton before. You have Tyler Boyd, who not only is new to the team, he's new to the NFL, the speed of the game. You have CJ Uzama, who really didn't do much at Auburn as a receiver, is now one of your main targets. And the fact they're completely overlooking Ryan Hewitt, as Connor alluded to, I think it's just the whole offense trying to get together and trying to gel. And I think some of it too is from the preseason. We had so many injuries this preseason where we just didn't have the right guys in there practicing. And so and Marvin Lewis has even mentioned this in some of the press conferences, how some of the guys are still kind of in their preseason reps because they were hurt during the preseason. He mentioned it with Obuehi and a couple other guys, where I think just that whole offense, just trying to get them to gel as cohesively as they looked last year when you're changing a lot of pieces like that. I think, and especially going against some good teams. I mean, Denver is one of the top defenses from last year. The Jets have that great front seven that kind of brutalized the Bengals, who were having some issues trying to figure out who to block when they were in pass protection. So, yeah, I think it's definitely fixable. I think it's just as the season goes on, as the competition gets a little easier, I think they're going to have it. They're going to gel and have a easier time of it. Now, if that doesn't happen, then yeah, it's going to be a long season. As Connor alluded to, they're going to lose interest. But I'd say I think it's fixable, and I'm seriously hoping it starts tomorrow night.
All right, I'm going to toss in 2 quick questions from a couple of my followers on Twitter, and I'll kind of combine them into one, and I'll just rapid fire answer them. So I've got one of my guys, Jay Rigas. He says, do you think they abandoned the run a bit early versus Denver? Followed up by Kentucky Dude, one of my other followers, who said, with the Miami D last in the league versus the run, the Bengals have to rush 30 times combined minimum, right? I think it's kind of a exaggeration there, but to both of those questions, I think they kind of just it's kind of a redundant question in terms of, we just kind of talked about with Hewitt, but I think there's still good questions regardless. The Dolphins have a very vulnerable run D, and I would love to see the Bengals run on them 30 times. I do think the Bengals didn't not like they late in the second half. I think I think they did abandon it a little too early in the sense that they just became more predictable. It seemed like they just stopped running for a while, and then late in the game they were like, oh yeah, we have to run. I forgot about that. And then kind of fed Jeremy Hill towards the end of the game, and the Broncos saw it coming. So with that all said, I think the run game is super crucial. I think anyone who's saying the run game is struggling, so we should completely, not that we should completely abandon it, but I think a lot of people are saying, oh, well, do what works for you. The Bengals are passing the ball well. Yeah, but Dalton's getting sacked a lot, and you have right now CJ 3 receiver in Cincinnati. So, LaFell's been playing okay. I think his numbers kind of compare with Marvin Jones's numbers from the first 3 games of last season. I think LaFell has more yards on fewer targets, but Jones had 1 or 2 touchdowns to the first 3 games. And then Boyd's numbers look pretty similar to Sanu's numbers as well. So I don't think and that's kind of going back to the question Scott was answering, I believe, earlier. I don't think those losses were huge. I think it's just a matter of, like you guys were saying, coaching. You need to just be able to establish the run in a way that the opponent doesn't see it coming. Or if you are going to be boring in your play calling, which is okay, just put Hewitt in front of Hill and see what happens, because on the line, the line's gonna have an easier job pass blocking if they run block on plays and get the defense guessing. So, those are my questions. Let's see. I have one more. Oh, and I'll head this one over to you guys. I got my boy Eric Wilson asking, whose return will make a bigger difference, Eifert or Burfict? I'll just give my 3-second take. Vinny Ray's been playing well in Burfict's absence. He had the drop picks, obviously. I think he's been playing pretty well, though. And I think, though Burfict's return will be awesome, I think there will be some growing pains with him coming back from injury again. And I think another factor that we didn't even really talk about is the fact that when Burfict comes back, the referees will, I mean, if we're talking about penalties that are going against the Bengals right now without Perfect, what's going to happen when he comes back? But honestly, I think, and maybe one of you guys can get more into it, I think Eifert's presence in the red zone where the Bengals have been terrible through 3 games is just going to be a huge lift. So I'll throw to you, AC. What do you think between Perfect and Eifert?
Yeah, I think, I mean, both will be huge, obviously. It's hard to say one over the other, but I will say Eifert as well, just because the Bengals, I think, are hovering. I know going into the Denver game, I think they were hovering around 27% on 3rd downs, I believe it was, and then somewhere around the same vicinity in terms of red zone touchdown conversion. They just were not very good. I think it was in the 30%. So, and credit Mike Nugent. He's been playing very well after a really shaky preseason. He's been playing very well and has really helped the team out a lot. But yeah, I think Eifert, especially in that red zone, especially as I think part of the reason why LaFell and Boyd have struggled to get open is because there's not a Tyler Eifert in the lineup. And then all of a sudden you see AJ Green get a little suffocated at times. You saw that in Pittsburgh. So I think Eifert kind of will open everything up once he gets there. I think Perfect will bring a lot of swagger and some big plays to the defense as well. But if I have to pick one, I'll pick Eifert.
Yeah, I'm just going to add real quick. I wanted to say Perfect just to be different, but unfortunately I'm going to join in and say Tyler Eifert also, only because we lost so much offensively as far as the weapons go. And you look at what we did last year, we were scoring a heck of a lot of points, and we were seemingly dominating. We were, and if you can score, you can kind of change the defense. You make your defense better because the other team has to catch up, and if they catch up, they're a little more predictable. And I think that's the one thing we're really losing is this year, is since we can't score, we can't kind of build that lead, we can't force the other team. We're letting the other team kind of dictate what they want to do, and we've seen it on defense how it's been negatively affecting us. So I think the Eifert addition is going to be, of the two, I mean, obviously both are great. I'd take either, but I'd say Eifert of the two.
All right, so that is the fan question segment for tonight. We got a lot of them, so thank you both on Twitter and on YouTube. A lot of different ones this week, and we appreciate those coming in. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can follow myself on Twitter at CJAnthonyCUI. Connor, where can they follow you?
How NFL, HOWE, then NFL.
And we're still working on Scott getting a Twitter account. So Scott, when you do, we'd love to promote it, buddy.
Light something on fire, and then maybe he'll see the smoke.
I'm going to have to stop being Amish someday. I do have internet, so I'm kind of slowly going that direction.
Small victories, buddy. Small victories.
I'm sure my grandma has Twitter.
I love it. But yeah, follow us on at BengalsOBI. You can, again, download the show on iTunes, the Orange and Black Insider. You can follow us on our YouTube channel, our SoundCloud channel, and also just stream the show from the Cincy Jungle website, who is gracious enough to present this show every week. So we're going to start wrapping up. Great stuff by the fans again, by the way. That's good stuff. Real quick answers. And I'll start with you, Connor. Biggest disappointment and biggest surprise, a pleasant surprise by the Bengals this year so far in through 3 weeks. I'll
go biggest disappointment. I think the obvious answer is what a lot of but I'm just going to go D-line in general. I think, like I was kind of alluding to earlier, you can throw the or whatever people on draft Twitter are saying about Dunlap and Geno Atkins still being really effective, but I think getting those sacks is something you just have to do as a defensive line, as a unit. And it's not on one person at all. It's on the entire unit. They're not stopping the run as well as they did last year. They're not turning and converting those pass rush opportunities into sacks. And anything short of a sack is just a missed opportunity. So I'm just going to go defensive line in terms of biggest disappointment. Biggest surprise, I mean, obvious answer here, I'll go Drake Kirkpatrick. I mean, he has the physical tools he has the makeup to be a top 10 corner in the NFL, and I don't think that's out of his range or I should say, I don't think that's out of the equation for him as a guy coming up in the future, especially under the tutelage of, Kevin Coyle, who turned Jonathan Joseph and Leon Hall into the best cornerback tandem in the NFL, and playing opposite a guy like Adam Jones, who is, as most of us know, one of the biggest film buffs in the NFL of any player. So I think that just seeing Dre, and it's not just from the pick, it's just that he played well. Like, he's been playing well for 3 weeks. He doesn't have the 11 pass breakups that Marcus Peters has, but he's given up 1 touchdown, and it was in absolutely great coverage that you really couldn't expect anything more of him to do. So that's why I'm going to, and he had 1 touchdown last season too, allowed. So far 2 touchdowns allowed in the past 2 seasons, not too shabby.
Scott, biggest disappointment and biggest pleasant surprise of the Bengals this year?
Biggest disappointment, I was, and apparently it's a big disappointment because me and Connor were thinking the same thing, pass rush. And he took the defensive side, which is on pace for like half of what they're on last year. So
2014 numbers.
They're on pace for 21. Last year they had 42 sacks. So I'm going to look as biggest disappointment on the offensive side. Giving up 12 sacks in 3 games, which is on pace for 64 sacks this year. The last 2 years, Dalton's only been sacked 41 times. So you have to add the last 3 years to get a number as big as they're on pace for this year. And he's being sacked on almost 10% of passing plays, which for a line that's supposed to be pretty good, where Whitworth, was all pro last year. He finally got the recognition. We like to say good things about Bowling and Zeitler, and, Bodine is Bodine. But he hasn't looked as Bodine-ish in every game this year. But
Bodine-ish.
He's looked better.
Is that an adjective, Bodine-ish?
I think for us it can be until we get sued by the Bengals.
That's what's crazy. He's played better this year, and the line's gotten worse. I just think Whitworth looked human, which is crazy.
And I'm going to say biggest surprise is after the first game, so I'm kind of limiting it to 2 games, is the rushing defense. Because after the first game, seeing Old Man Forte kind of gouge us. I like that we've given up 0 rushing touchdowns, and we've held D'Angelo Williams and CJ Anderson to 131 yards, no touchdowns, and 2.8 yards a carry. And these were guys coming into those games who were pretty good. And
they're both hot too.
Yeah, so I think that's a very positive. Is that as much as they just can't seem to get the quarterback, they are doing a good job at stopping opposing defensive or opposing running backs. It is getting late, and have one of the only 2 teams to give up 0 touchdowns. So I do have one weird surprise that I just want to throw in. I'll be really quick. Try to keep it 140 characters. We were mostly all excited when Brandon Tate was let go because Alex Erickson looked great in preseason, and we're going to give Adam Jones' chance to return punts. This year, Alex Erickson is averaging 6.3 yards per return. Adam Jones is averaging 6.3 yards per return. Last year, Brandon Tate, 6.3 yards per punt return. You look at kick returns, Erickson, Jones, and Burkhead have all returned kick returns this year. All of them are averaging less than what Tate did last year. So maybe it's more of a disappointment. It's also kind of a shock that they all have the same punt return average.
That might speak more to the unit than the player. And you kind of stole my thunder a little bit there, Scott, but that's okay because you're a good guy, and I'll let you do that.
As far as you know.
Yeah. Just real quickly, I'm gonna say biggest pleasant surprise for me, and I hope to the Lord above that I do not jinx the guy, but I mentioned him just a few minutes ago. Mike Nugent. He's 7 of 8 so far this year. 1 miss was from, I believe, 50 plus or 50 yards or so in New York. But since then, he has been a very solid. He's been basically the most consistent weapon on the Bengals. I mean, even though he's special teams, he's been their most consistent point getter for the team. And he's 7 of 8 on the year and 5 of 5 on his extra points. So, and extra points now are no longer gimmies, given the rule changes over the past couple of years. Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to say he's kind of my pleasant surprise so far this year. And you mentioned Hunt. He is one. Will Clark is another as well. Both those guys have come in and played pretty well as rotational guys. I think also as disappointments, you guys, spoke perfectly on the offensive line and all that kind of stuff. I hate to pinpoint one guy, but I'm going to say Sean Williams. I think, you give him the big deal. He showed some progress last year, and then this year he's got 2 dropped interceptions already. He's been out of position on certain plays that have led to touchdowns. Not very pleased with what I've seen from him. Scott, to piggyback on what you said, I have been very, very disappointed with the kick and punt return games this year. And it's not just Alex Erickson, it's Adam Jones. He's credited with a fumble that probably shouldn't have been last week, but he's not popping the big returns that we've become accustomed to. Rex Burkhead had a pedestrian, I believe, 20-yard average last week on kick returns. And granted, those are more difficult now, given some rule changes there. But that's a unit that has always, if for some reason the Bengals offense has sputtered over the past couple of years, the special teams has always seemed to rise to the occasion and given a good return, and everybody has wanted to run Brandon Tate out of town. And now not because of that, but you're seeing a bunch of guys combine for not really great results. So hopefully that picks up. Real quick, guys, we're going to get out of here. Again, thanks for all the support. Thanks for the fan questions tonight. Connor Howe, aside from the horn in the background, what is your score prediction for this Thursday night game as the Dolphins come to Cincinnati and play the Bengals?
Yeah, my bad on that. I'll go.
You're not honking the horn. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah.
I own a dog. Well, my dog's barked in live shows before, so it's fine. Yeah.
We'll go big time. 31-3.
Who?
Whoa.
Orange and black.
Well, white and black.
Yeah.
Need a statement win.
Let's actually two-prong this real quick. Do you like the whiteout jerseys?
Ooh, white and black. Oh yeah, I love it. That's what's in the mail. I got the jersey in the mail today. I didn't even realize that.
Legit.
Now I realize what came in my mail today.
Just in time.
I have to pick that up tomorrow.
Just in time.
Wow, it's in mail for tomorrow. I'm so excited now.
All right,
I'm not a fan of it with the orange helmets.
A lot of people feel that way.
You can't really do anything about it.
A lot of people feel that way, and
I think it'll still look good.
I actually saw it, and I'm gonna just cut in real quick with one portion of my answer. I saw it in the pro shop. I really liked it. I thought it was really, really slick looking, personally. But I do agree with you, Scott, that the orange helmet kind of throws a different mix to it. But so, Scott, you do like the jersey, but not with the helmet, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Score prediction.
No one's ever called me a fashion guru, so
well, I'm the fashion police, so
I'm going to say, as far as the game, though, actually going beyond the clothing, I think Ndamukong Suh versus Bodine can get beat really ugly. So despite that, the Dolphins have used like 5 running backs this year, including Isaiah Peed, and can't stop anyone running the ball. So I'm going to say we win. Probably not as big as I'd love it to be. I'd like to see 31-3. I'm going to be a little more close. I'll say 24-17.
24-17. Okay, so we've got 31-3 Connor in favor of the Bengals. 24-17 Bengals, Scott?
Yeah, Bengals.
Okay. I don't know about this one. I'm inclined to still pick the Bengals. I've picked them every week, both on Connor's picks as well as just on this show, and they've disappointed. I think that this is where they begin to kind of rally. They turn things around, even though there's been some struggles and all of the other things and the moving parts that they've had to deal with. I think, you're now basically a month into the season and you're beginning to gel, I think, as a team. So I do think they pull it off. I think it's relatively close. You said 24-17, Scott. I'll say 23-20 Bengals.
Oh, wow. That is close. close.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty close, and not because the Bengals aren't a good team, or not because necessarily Miami is so great. I just, I still see maybe some growing pains with all of the different moves that the Bengals have made this offseason, both in player personnel and coaching, but I do think they fight hard, and they buck that 0-3 trend in terms of the last 3 games they've played against the Dolphins. It's a team they don't normally play well against, and then obviously it's on that primetime stage. But I do think that the Bengals come out victorious and really start riding the ship, hopefully, as 2016 rolls on. That's going to do it for us for the Orange and Black Insider. Once again, real quickly, hate to keep promoting the show, but you can download it on iTunes. You can follow our Twitter account at BengalsOBI. We also, even though this show is about an hour or so in length, we also break it up into segments. Some of the segments you heard tonight, we break that up and we put it on Cincy Jungle in terms of fan questions. And Scott does his Fantasy Football Insider. He didn't do it this week, but he's been frequently doing that. So we break that up. We put it on Cincy Jungle in more digestible portions. And those are also available on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, all of that stuff. So check that out. Thanks for all your support and all of the positive feedback we have received in this very new show. Very much appreciated. Scott, I appreciate your time as well.
Thanks. I was going to say the segments are cheaper if they get them that way.
They are, yeah. And they're closer to that 140 character mark, right?
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for everything, Connor. Thank you, and let's get a win Thursday night against the Miami Dolphins. Get back to 500 and get back to feeling good about this Bengals team. Houday from the Orange and Black Insider. I'm Anthony Cosenza for Connor Howe and Scott Schultz.
14-2 starts now.
There you go.